Getting the resource evaluation step right is critical to a mining project's success. An over or underestimated ore reserve will result in business losses that can prove disastrous for any company. That may seem like a silly statement now, as we have such strict processes and regulations in place to ensure resource evaluation is done correctly. But this wasn't always the case. Let's take a look at an example of what can happen if we get this step wrong. In 1969, the Vietnam War was in full swing, and the demand for nickel was soaring. To cash in on the nickel fever created by the sudden price rise, a company called Poseidon in Australia quickly raised money and started exploring for nickel in a known nickel area of Western Australia. In April 1969, they released a report to the Adelaide Stock Exchange announcing the discovered nickel in surface samples near Mount Windara, and they would start drilling for underground samples. They also listed on the larger Sydney Stock Exchange in order to attract more investors. In October of that year, Australian junior miner Poseidon Nickel issued a release of drilling results that showed a significant high-grade nickel deposit. Shares rose from 85 cents to $38 by the end of October. They quoted that the mineralized zone had an indicated length of 1,000 feet and a minimum width of 65 feet. Poseidon's share price shot up by 46,000% throughout 1969. At the height of the frenzy in February 1970, the company had a market value of $700 million. That's 3 times the size of Australia's largest listed bank at that time. Unfortunately, Poseidon never made a profit nor paid a dividend. It ran out of money and went into receivership just 5 years later. Why is this? Well, it was shown later that at the time of the release of the resource results, Poseidon had not received any laboratory assays. No details of the intersection width were available. It was total fabrication. It was all made up. Before this was known publicly, Poseidon management awarded themselves options when the share price had ballooned and sold their options before they revealed that the data was far too sketchy, meaning inconsistent, to draw any solid conclusions. It was a classic case of fraud. When the actual assay results were finally released, they were shown to be hugely overstated. This shocking revelation meant huge trouble for Poseidon. Their stock price crashed as investors panicked. The company ended up going bankrupt from the fallout of this scandal. Executives faced major legal consequences too. Poseidon was a notorious case of corporate fraud in Australia during the 1980s. The company engaged in what became known as the Poseidon Bubble, primarily in the nickel market. It's interesting to note that insider trading, as this was not illegal during this time. And this was not isolated to Poseidon alone. There were several cases of insider trading during this period of mining history. However, Poseidon's situation was different to most other insider trading cases, as it actually had a real mine with real metal in it. Most of the outright fraudulent companies at that time had neither. It took regulators nearly 20 years to do something about this problem, but in 1989 they incorporated the first version of the JORC code, JORC standing for Joint or Resources Committee. This code provides regulation and guidances to standardise the method of reporting resources and reserves, and it is a staple of the industry today. It's hard now to imagine life without it, isn't it? Look, the absence of insider trading regulations and guidance provided by the JORC code for resource estimation does not fully explain why this situation unfolded. We cannot overlook the fact that supply was not able to keep up with demand at the time. This was because of the long lead times for exploration, development, and bringing new mines into production. It is the very same problem that we are faced with today with the current transition to clean energy. Fortunately, we have a strong regulatory environment to navigate this transition in. In the next podcast episode, we'll look at this regulatory environment, the birth of the JORC code, including the framework as it is today, and the industry-wide adoption of this code.